Welcome everybody to the Game of the Day presentation from the 2016 British Chess Championships, currently taking place in Bournemouth, England. I'm International Master Andrew Martin and I'm going to be your host on these presentations for the next 11 days. Round 1 of the Championships on the top boards featured lopsided games between players maybe 400-500 rating points lower than their Grandmaster opponents. And sure enough, the Grandmasters came through with relative ease. The top 3 boards are very technical affairs, where in general the stronger players strolled to victory. So I'm going to concentrate on what I think was the best game from the top boards, the game on board 4, between Grandmaster Nick Pert and Carl Bicknell. Pert was white, and he opened with his habitual d4 and knight to f3. Very safe play. This is what Nick has done for many years. By playing this way, he cuts out openings like the Budapest, the Albin counter gambit, just dampens down Black's enthusiasm for a sharp game. And what I liked about Bicknell's approach in this game is that he went right for it with a Benko gambit-like move, b5. Now this looks like it's the Benko, but in fact it's a bit more ambitious than the Benko because white hasn't played c4 yet. And this makes quite a big difference in the position, because it means that the pawn on b5 can be attacked very early on by this bishop on f1. And this makes Black's queenside pawn formation a little bit shaky. If he can overcome this handicap of the opening, then he can often find this space gaining move b5 helps him in a positive way. But it can also react very negatively. So we're looking for white to attack b5 at an early point in this game, perhaps with the help of the move e4. Bishop g5. And this is the idea that is generally thought to put Black's opening idea under the microscope. Because with bishop g5, white's basically threatening bishop takes f6, followed by e4. After that comes a4, and at this moment in the game, Black's starting to feel some pressure. What Black doesn't want in this position is to be forced to play b4 prematurely, which will enable white to manoeuvre a knight to c4. This should give white much the better of the game in the opening. So that's what Black's got to watch out for. d6, a natural enough move. Perhaps expecting bishop takes f6, which is usually the main line here. White just goes through with his idea. And whichever way Black recaptures, white's going to go e4. And after a6, protecting the pawn, because as you can see the pawn is now under fire. Sorry, a6, now comes a4. Well, presumably Bicknell was ready for that, but was he ready for the surprising move e4? And I must admit, this was not a move I had seen before in this position, but it turns out to be actually quite playable, and in fact very dangerous to Black. Now at first sight, this looks as though it's impossible because Black can take the pawn. Clearly after that, white's intended to go bishop takes b5 check, and Black blocks with the bishop. So with Black threatening to take the bishop on b5 and the bishop on g5, what is white's big idea in this position? Well, it turns out that bishop d3 is the main idea, and this leads to a very complicated situation, which, if you haven't examined it in advance, would prove difficult to negotiate. For instance, there are 2 ideas here. If Black simply takes the dark square bishop, white recaptures and then plays e5, which is the main line move, we reach a complicated game after d takes e6, queen takes g5, takes, and then castles. And the problem for Black precisely is his king stuck in the middle of the board. And he can't easily get it out of the middle because after bishop e7, white can play bishop b5 again. So I presume that's the type of thing which Nick Pert was aiming for. And I think with white controlling d5 here very clearly, white must have an edge. Running that one more time, because it is quite interesting, the computer is suggesting to me that after bishop d3, Black might try knight f6, and after castles, cheerfully sacrifice the exchange after knight takes d5. I don't know many humans who would be attracted by this concept, but apparently this is only slightly better for white. I find that difficult to believe with the black knights still on the back rank. To me, this looks clearly better for white. In fact, I would go so far as to say almost winning, with black a bit tied down. So perhaps that's why Bicknell in the game goes a6, protecting his pawn, and then we revert to a kind of more traditional formation in this line, with white hitting the pawn at the earliest possible opportunity with a4. And with the knight on d2, black now very reluctant to push forward, which allows at some stage, very soon, that knight to come into c4 with control of the position. And this is how Nick Pert plays. He likes to get a grip on the game early and then use his excellent technique to grind the opponent down. So Bicknell goes rook b8, but this has the net effect of surrendering the a file. So it's a question now of whether white can use this trump. c4. Well, again, there are previous instances of this position, and in one game white played this very sharp move, b4. Unless this is 100% certain for white, then I can see why Nick prefers c4. But b4 is quite a dangerous challenge to black's idea. I'm not going to dwell on it here. c4 was played in the game. Black took the pawn, and now queen to c2. So white's development is speeding along. With queen c2 he's protected e4, he's getting ready for knight takes c4. Black's development seems lagging to an extent. I imagine white should have a slight edge here. But white's got to be a bit careful. It's not totally straightforward to play this position because of the weakness of his pawn on b2. The rook on b8 is already hitting that point, and in general, black would quite like to exchange off all the knights in this position. That's a typical Benko Gambit motif. Black exchanges off all the knights, and by doing so accentuates the weakness of that pawn on b2. So perhaps that explains Bicknell's next move, knight to g4. But as the game progresses, although this looks logical and fits in with black's idea of changing off all the knights, Pert makes this look like a mistake with some excellent play. He first moves in with his rook, saying to black, well, yes, the acquisition of the a file does make a difference here. And now, in the commentary room, we couldn't quite see what black was going to do. We didn't think that any of his moves were really totally satisfactory. We looked at rook e8, very passive. We looked at queen e8. Well, after that, white just goes h3. We looked at just h6, after which white coolly plays bishop f4. But in the end, Bicknell, perhaps dissatisfied with all these old alternatives, played f6, bishop h4, and now knight ge5. Well, bishop h4 was supposed to prevent that move because of the weakness of the square e7. So what is black going to do after knight f takes e5? I think this is probably why we didn't like f6 in the commentary room, just this simple capture. And black is getting into a mess. If he takes with the knight, then white will take, and there's no move which doesn't lose a pawn. So Bicknell takes with the d pawn. You know, it's really starting to get ugly now. If he takes with the f pawn, he runs straight into knight takes d6. So it really is already a very difficult situation. D takes e5, knight comes to a5, angling for the square c6. Black gets out of the pin, but as you can see, he's got a very ugly weakness on c5, and probably already his position can be considered lost. And very surprisingly, after only, 17 moves, white doesn't seem to have done very much, yet somehow he's completely outmanoeuvred black. Knight to b3. Again, this is how Nick Pert plays. Very safe move, maintaining his advantage, much better, plays with no risk, takes away all the opponent's chances. But I wonder why he didn't play knight c6, because this looks also very strong. Perhaps he didn't like the idea of black being able to exchange a pair of rooks after rook b7, rook fa1. But in reality, you know, white is just bringing all his pieces to bear on black's poor position, and white maintains a very easy advantage after simple moves, just moves like bishop takes, rook takes b7 and queen b3. And as you can see, black is still in a terrible bind. But we can't criticise knight at b3, it's very clear. Bicknell hasn't got much to do, and now Pert moves in and takes off the pawn. And all black can play for here are tricks. The main problem for poor Bicknell is that rook takes b2 is simply answered by rook to a8. And that is a crusher. The pin on c8 just ties black up completely. So black is down to horrible moves like bishop f8. White moved in with queen to c7. And again, this terrible pin after rook takes b2, rook a8 is crushing. So this is why Bicknell plays bishop g4. But that light squared bishop has no real squares to go to. And f3 just sent the bishop to a hideous square on the side of the board. I suppose black could have tried rook to c8, but after queen b7, rook b8, queen c6, white maintains his completely winning position. So bishop h5, it's now a question of how Nick finishes off. He moves in with queen c6, black goes g5, and white's very happy to remove the queens from the board and just play bishop f2, leaving the black pieces in a clumsy cluster on the king side. Black tried g4, white took it, simple play will do, the bishop comes back, and now bishop b5. And that wins outright as the rook on e8 runs out of squares. So Bicknell resigned. Now, as we all know these days, it's not that easy to beat a lower rated opponent because of the opportunity to prepare using a chess database. But Nick Pert, in his own way, plays in an anti-computer style. This d4, knight f3, fireproof play with white, and as you can see in this game, using excellent technique to outmaneuver a skilled opponent such as Carl Bicknell. So I enjoyed that game, and that was my game of the day for round one.